We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis Amid Beis Meseches Horayos. This is Horayos Daf 12b. On the previous Amid, the Gemara said that our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan because our Mishnah says that when it says the Kohen Gadol brings a par, that's talking about the Kohen Gadol who's anointed with the oil. But the Kohen Gadol who's Meruba B'Begadim, the Kohen Gadol who just wears the garments of the Kohen Gadol, that was during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash when they did not have the Shemen HaMishcha, they didn't have the anointing oil, so the Kohen Gadol only wore the Begadim but was not anointed with the oil, so he would not bring the par. And the Gemara said that follows the Rabbanan but does not follow Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir holds that the Meruba Begadim does in fact bring a par. But the Gemara now continues and asks, Ema Seifa, but now look at the end of the Mishnah, which seems to be according to Rabbi Meir, because it says at the end of the Mishnah, Ein bein Kohen Meshamesh LeKohen Sha'avar, there's no difference between the Kohen Gadol who's presently serving and the Kohen Gadol who did serve, El Par Yom HaKippurim V'Asiris Ha'efa, except the Par Yom HaKippurim and the Asiris Ha'efa. And Rashi explains, Ema Seifa, look at the end of the Mishnah, Ein bein Kohen HaMeshamesh LeKohen Sha'avar, Dahainu Sheni, the Kohen Sha'avar actually refers to the second Kohen Gadol. In other words, the way that it works is that the Kohen Gadol, for whatever reason, was disqualified, and so a Kohen Gadol temporarily took over. That's the second Kohen Gadol, and then that Kohen Gadol is Ovar. He's no longer the substitute, so you go back to the first. So in this particular context, in our Mishnah, when it says Kohen Sha'avar, that refers to the second substitute Kohen Gadol. But in any case, the point is there's no difference between the first Kohen Gadol and the second. Elapar Yom HaKippur and V'Asiris Ha'efa. The only difference is in terms of the bull on Yom Kippur and the Asiris Ha'efa to Mishal Rishon Hein Boin. Those are brought from the first Kohen Gadol. But the point is, Halachol Shar Divreim, but for everything else, according to our Mishnah, Zev Zeh Shavin, the first Kohen Gadol and the replacement Kohen Gadol, they're equal. The Sheni Nami Kol Mitzvahs Kuna Gadola Olav. The second one has all the mitzvahs of being a Kohen Gadol. That's what it says at the end of our Mishnah. And the Gemara continues and says, Ason Rabbi Meir, that part of the Mishnah seems to be following Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Iru Bo Psul B'Kohen Gadol. Let's say a disqualification happens in the Kohen Gadol, that's talking about the first Kohen Gadol, V'Yavar, and then he's no longer Kohen Gadol, Uminu Kohen Acher Tachtav, and then they appoint the second Kohen Gadol, Harishon Chozer La'avodaso, so the first one goes back to being the Kohen Gadol, V'Hasheni Kol Mitzvahs Kuna Olav, and the second one, he remains with all the mitzvahs of being a Kohen Gadol. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir, essentially exactly what it is saying in our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir seems to be the author of the end of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says, no, Rishon Chozer La'avodah. So the first one does go back to his avoda, to his work as being the Kohen Gadol. V'sheni, but that second Kohen Gadol who replaced him, Eino Roy Lo LeKohen Gadol V'lo LeKohen Hadyot. He can't do anything. He can't be a Kohen Gadol anymore, and he can't be a regular Kohen. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Ma'isa b'Yosef ben Elam mitzipore. There was an incident with Yosef ben Elam from Tzipore. She'ira bo psul b'Kohen Gadol, that there was a disqualification in the Kohen Gadol. And we'll take a look at the gears of the Mesoras Hashas. Uminu tachdav, they appointed instead of him. Uva ma'isel lefnei chachamim, and that came before the chachamim. The Amru, and they said, Rishon chozer la'avodah. So the first one goes back to his avoda. The first one goes back to being the Kohen Gadol. Sheni eno roy lo leKohen Gadol v'lo leKohen Hadyot. The second one is not fit to be a Kohen Gadol or a Kohen Hadyot. And what's the reason for the second one being totally disqualified? Kohen Gadol misham eva. The Kohen Gadol is disqualified because of the fact that it's going to cause eva, it's going to cause hatred. And Kohen Hadyot, he can't be a Kohen Hadyot either, misham malin bakodesh ve'ein moridin, because you have to go up in holiness and not down. If he already served as a temporary Kohen Gadol, he can't go down to being a Kohen Hadyot. In any case, the point over here is that the second Kohen Gadol, according to our Mishnah, he actually does have the full status of a Kohen Gadol, and that seems to be like Rabbi Meir. So Reisha Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir, are we saying the beginning of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan and the end of the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir? Amar Rav Chisda says, in yes, Reisha Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir. The beginning of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan and the end of the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Rav Yosef says, Rebbe, the entire Mishnah is actually Rebbe. V'nosef lo aliba Tanoi, and he happens to hold according to various Tanoims. He doesn't hold like one Tana across the board. In the Reisha, in that case, he holds like the Rabbanan, and in the Seifa, he holds like Rabbi Meir. Rava says Rabbi Shimon. The author of our Mishnah is actually Rabbi Shimon. V'savar lo Rabbi Meir b'chada upala goleh b'chada. The same basic idea. Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Meir in one regard, but he argues with him in another regard. And Rashi explains, Asoin l'Rabbi Meir Detanya. Again, the end of our Mishnah is following Rabbi Meir, as we learned in a Brisa. Rashi notes, Avar de Brisa, when the Brisa uses the word Avar, Lodami lisha Avar de Masnis, and it's not the same as the word Sha'avar in the Mishnah, because as Rashi just said, Kohen Sha'avar in the Mishnah refers to that second Kohen Gadol, that substitute, whereas in the Brisa, when it uses the word Avar, it means that first Kohen Gadol is no longer the Kohen Gadol and requires a substitute. And Rashi continues, Rebbe hi v'nosev la'aliba de Tanoi, maybe our Mishnah is Rebbe, and he follows different Tanoim, meaning Bechada Savar like Rabbi Meir. In one regard, he holds like Rabbi Meir. V'sisma Rabbi Meir, and he made the Mishnah unattributed following Rabbi Meir. Overation, and then in the first part of the Mishnah, again, the first part of the Mishnah discussing the Meruba Bebegadim not bringing the par, Savar like Rabbanan, he holds like the Rabbanan, V'sisma Rabbanan, and he made it unattributed, but following the Rabbanan. And then the other answer, Rabbi Shimon Savar like Rabbi Meir b'chadet, that Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Meir in one regard, the Kohen Sha'avar, the Sheni, Kol Mitzvahs Kuna Olav, that again, the second Kohen Gadol is going to be considered like a Kohen Gadol fully, Chutz mi par Yom HaKippurim v'Asir Sa'efa, except for the par of Yom Kippur and the Asir Sa'efa that come from the first Kohen Gadol, Upalagol b'chada, but he also argues with him in one regard, Ilu Rabbi Meir Savar Meruba Begadim Mevi par Habal Kol HaMitzvahs. According to Rabbi Meir, the Meruba Begadim brings the par Habal Kol HaMitzvahs, Dahainu par Helam Davar Shal Tzibor, that's the par Helam Davar Shal Tzibor, V'ilu Rabbi Shimon Savar, whereas Rabbi Shimon holds Daino maybe par Habal Kol HaMitzvahs, that he doesn't bring the par Habal Kol HaMitzvahs, Kiritnan, like we learned in our Mishnah, in Bein Mashuach B'Shemen HaMishchal, the Meruba Begadim, Ala par Habal Kol HaMitzvahs. The difference between the one anointed with the oil and the one who wears the garments is the par habal kol ha-mitzvahs. And the Gemara now continues and brings the brisa with Rabbi Shimon's opinion. The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Devarim shebein kohen gadol lekohen hedyot. The following are the differences between a kohen gadol and a regular kohen. Elohim, these are the differences. Par habal kol ha-mitzvahs, the par that's brought for all mitzvahs. Again, that's brought by the kohen gadol. He brings the par. Upar yom ha-kippurim v'asir sa'efa, and the par of Yom Kippur and the asir sa'efa. V'lo poreya v'lo porim, and he doesn't grow his hair long, and he doesn't tear his garments for mourning. Aval hu porim milmata, but he does tear from below in a manner that's not obvious. V'hedyot milmala, but the hedyot, the regular kohen, he tears above. Ve'ein metame lekrovim, he does not become tameh to relatives. That's the kohen gadol. Umuzar ala besula, and he's also warned with regards to a besula. V'asr ba'almana, and he's forbidden to marry an almana, a widow. Umachzir eser rotzeach, and when he dies, the rotzeach returns from the miklat. Umakrav onen, and even when he's in acute mourning on the day of the relative's death, he can bring offerings. V'eno ochel, but he doesn't eat from those offerings. V'eno cholek, and he doesn't take a portion, a share from those offerings. Makriv chelek barosh, he offers, he's allowed to bring the offerings first, he gets the first opportunity. V'notel chelek barosh, and when they're taking shares of the offerings, he's the one that has the first opportunity to take shares from the offering. Umeshamish b'shmona kelim, and he serves with the 8 garments. V'chol avodas yom hakippurim eino kasheira elabo, and all of the service on Yom Kippur is only kosher with him. Upater al tumas mikdash v'kadashav, he's exempt from bringing a carbon for tumas mikdash v'kadashav. And now the brisa says, and all of this brisa is going to be assumed to be Rabbi Shimon, v'chula nohagin b'meruba begadim. Everything that we said above is true by the meruba begadim as well. Even the kohen gadol who is not anointed with the oil, he just wears the garments of the kohen gadol. All of these things are true. Chutz mi par hamevi al kol ha-mitzvahs, except for bringing that par, the par habo al kol ha-mitzvahs, and that again was the position of our Mishnah. That's why we're saying Rabbi Shimon is the author of our Mishnah. And v'chula nohagin b'mashiach, and all of them apply by b'mashiach sha'avar, all of them apply by the Kohen Gadol who was the substitute Kohen Gadol, the second Kohen Gadol, chutz mi par yom ha-kippurim v'asir sa'efa, with the exception of the par yom ha-kippurim and the asir sa'efa. And that also, again, that follows our Mishnah, that second Kohen Gadol, he's treated exactly like a Kohen Gadol, with the exception of the par yom ha-kippurim and the asir sa'efa, which come from the first Kohen Gadol. And the brisa continues, v'chulan ein nohagin b'mashuach melchama. All of this does not apply to the Kohen Gadol, to the Kohen who's mashuach melchama, the one that's anointed for war. Chutz mi hei devarim ha'amurim beparsha, except for the 5 things that are mentioned in the parsha, and those 5 things that apply to the mashuach melchama are lo poreya. Again, he doesn't grow out his hair. V'lo porim, he doesn't tear his garments in mourning. Ve'ein metame lekrovim, he does not become tamei to relatives. Umuzar ala besula, he's warned with regards to a virgin. V'yasr ba'almana, he's prohibited to marry an almana, to marry a widow. And the brisa continues, Umachzir es harotzeach, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds the mashuach melchama also returns the murderer from the miklat. The chachamim omrim eino machzir, and the chachamim say no, the mashuach melchama does not return the murderer from the miklat. And the Gemara asks, V'haimi maid Rabbi Shimon. Now, how do we even know that this brisa is Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon is not mentioned at all in this brisa. At the end of the brisa, we have a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim with regards to machzir sarotzeach. But how do you know that whole first part of the brisa is Rabbi Shimon? Amar Rapapa says, Man shamatale, who's the one that holds? The Amar that says, Pater al tumas mikdash v'kadashav, who's the one that says exempt? When it comes to a Kohen Gadol, we say he's exempt from tumas mikdash v'kadashav. That's Rabbi Shimon. That's Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon's the one who says the Kohen Gadol does not have to bring an offering for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav, and therefore we know this brisa is Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The brisa just said above, Chutz mehei devarim ha'amurim beparsha, the 5 things that are mentioned in the parsha, they apply to the Mashuach Melchama. The Gemara says, Menohani Mili, from where do we know this, that these 5 things apply to the Mashuach Melchama? And the Gemara says, the Tana Rabbanan, that the rabbis taught in the following brisa. The pasuk says, "V'hakohen hagadol me'achav." It talks about the Kohen Gadol. Zeh Kohen Gadol. That part of the pasuk refers to the Kohen Gadol. Asher yutzak al rosho shemen hamishcha. That's poured on his head, the shemen hamishcha. Zeh Mashuach Melchama. That phrase in the pasuk is a reference to the Mashuach Melchama. Umila yas yadu lilbosh as habegadim. And when the pasuk says Mila yas yadu lilbosh as habegadim, that he wears the garments, Zeh meruba begadim. That part of the pasuk is referring to the meruba begadim. So the pasuk as a whole is referring to the Kohen Gadol, the Mashuach Melchama, and the Meruba Begadim. And al kulan hu omar, on all of these types of Kohanim Gedolim, the pasuk says, Rosh lo yifra, he can't let his hair grow out. Uvegadav lo yifram, he doesn't tear his garments. The al kol nafshos meis lo yavu, he can't come upon nafshos meis, he can't come upon a dead body and become tamei. Now yochel yu kulan makriv and onan. Now one might think that all these types of Kohanim Gedolim are the same in that they still bring the offerings even when they're in acute mourning, when they're in onan. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Ki nezer shemen mishchas elokav olav. It says that the anointing oil is upon him, and that's like an exclusion. Olav velo al chaveiro. That means on him, that halacha applies only to the Kohen Gadol and not to his companions, not again to the Mashuach Melchama and the Meruba bebegadim. V'achar shechilku akasav. Now that the Torah set him aside and made him distinct, meaning the Kohen Gadol is distinct from the other Kohanim Gedolim, so to speak. So yachol lo yehi mitzuva ala basula. One might think that the other Kohanim Gedolim, they're not commanded, let's say the Mashuach Melchama is not commanded to marry a basula, to marry a virgin. Maybe he's different than a Kohen Gadol. Talmud Lomar v'hu, the pasuk says v'hu, that's an inclusion, and therefore we understand that the Mashuach Melchama is commanded ala basula, he has to marry a virgin as well. And the Gemara continues, Ketanai, this issue about Besula by a Mashuach Melchama is actually a Machlokas Tanoim. V'hu isha b'vsula yikach, it says he's going to take a woman who's a Besula, a virgin. Achar shechilak hakasav riba, after the pasuk sets aside and makes the Kohen Gadol distinct, there's an inclusion over here. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, meaning to say the Mashuach Melchama is included in the halacha of marrying a Besula. Rabbi Akiva says, Ein liela sha'avar machmas kiryo, I only know to include, let's say you had a Kohen Gadol who couldn't be a Kohen Gadol, he was deposed from being a Kohen Gadol because of a seminal emission. Machmas mumin minayin, how do we know to include a Kohen Gadol who was removed because of blemishes? Talmud Lomar v'hu, that's what the v'hu is coming for, meaning if you have a Kohen Gadol who was no longer the Kohen Gadol because of blemishes, he's included in the halacha, mitzuva ala besula, but according to Rabbi Akiva, we would not include a Mashuach Melchama by the halacha of a besula. And Rashi explains, Talmud Lomar ki nezer shemen mishchas elokav olav velo al Mashiach chaveiro. Again, the pasuk is an exclusion, and it means the Kohen Gadol, but not the Mashuach Melchama. Again, lemuute Mashuach Melchama. Over here, we're excluding a Mashuach Melchama, the ein makriv onen, that he does not bring offerings as an onen when he is in acute mourning. And Rashi notes it's a little unclear whether we're saying the same thing by Meruba begadim. So Rashi notes, aval Kohen Gadol makriv onen, but a Kohen Gadol brings as an onen bein Meruba begadim uvein rishon shechozer avoda. It doesn't matter if he's meruba begadim. It doesn't matter. Let's say he was a Kohen Gadol who was no longer a Kohen Gadol and then returns to being Kohen Gadol. The afilu sheni, or even the second, the substitute Kohen Gadol. All of those actually, we would say they bring onein mipnei shehein bechlal kahuna gedola. They're all considered kahuna gedola. Lafuke mashuach melchama, that excludes mashuach melchama. The lav bechlal kahuna gedola, who he's not considered in the category of kahuna gedola. And so therefore Rashi's understanding that when the brisa starts to exclude and says we're excluding the Mashuach Melchama, it's only the Mashuach Melchama that's being excluded and not the other kinds of Kohanim Gedolim. V'achar shechilku akasav, and then the Brisa said, once the Pasuk makes the Kohen Gadol distinct to the Mashuach Melchama, and he says that the Mashuach Melchama is different than the Kohen Gadol, she'eino makriv onen ka Kohen Gadol, that again the Mashuach Melchama doesn't bring as an onen like a Kohen Gadol, so yachol lo yehei mitzuva ala basula, one might think that he's not commanded to marry a basula, to marry a virgin. And so then we had a machlokas tanoim actually about the issue of besula. Again, Rabbi Akiva said that when it comes to when the pasuk says v'hu, what the pasuk is actually including is avar machmas kiryo, machmas mumin. As Rashi explains, elasha avar machmas kiryo. Let's say he was no longer Kohen Gadol because he was a Baal Keri, he had a seminal emission to have a Kohen Gadol ma'aliyah. That person's a full Kohen Gadol. Sharei chozer la'avodaso, he's going to return to his avoda. And avar machmas, let's say he's no longer the Kohen Gadol because of muma, because of a blemish. So that's a little bit worse. Deino Eino chozer lavoda. So in that case, he'll never actually return to the avoda mibnei hamum because of the blemish. But he also is mitzvah when it comes to besula. Minayin shem mitzvah ala besula. From where do we know he's commanded about a besula to marry a besula? Talmud lomar v'hu. The pasuk says v'hu, and so again, according to Rabbi Kiva, that's what v'hu comes to include, and a mashuach milchama would not be included in the commandment to marry a besula. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question: Moshiach shenitztara. Let's say you have a kohen gadol who gets tzaras. Mahu ba'almana. What's the halacha with regards to an almana? Kohen gadol normally cannot marry a widow. Is this Moshiach shenitztara? Is he able to marry an almana? Mid chodachi, is he pushed off? Or miftar pater, or is he exempt? We'll see Rashi in a moment exactly how to interpret those terms. But the point is he allowed to marry an almana or not? Lo have biyadi. He didn't know the answer. And the Gemara continues, Zimnin, on another occasion, have a Yosef Rapapa v'kami boile. Rapapa was sitting and he asked the same question about a kohen gadol that gets tzaras, whether he can marry an almana or not. Amar lehuna bereder of Nachman Rapapa. Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, said to Rapapa, Tanina, we learned it in the Brisa above. Ein li ela sha'avar machmas kirya. I only know, let's say I have a kohen gadol that couldn't be a kohen gadol anymore because he's a balkari, because of a seminal emission. He has to marry a virgin, a basula. Avar machmas mumin minayin. How do we know that's true also when it comes to a kohen gadol who's not a kohen gadol anymore because of the mum, because of blemishes? Talmud lomar v'hu, the pasuk says v'hu, to include even that kind of a kohen gadol has to marry a basula, and so therefore you see from that, if that's true by a kohen gadol who has a blemish, the same should be true by tzaras. The halacha basula, the halacha of almana should remain the same. And the Gemara says, Kam nashke bereshe. He got up, he kissed him on his head for giving this answer, v'yoyev le barate, and he gave him his daughter. And Rashi explains, Mashiach shenitztara, kolomar kohen gadol shenitztara ma'u b'almana, means to ask a kohen gadol who gets tzaras, is he allowed to marry a widow or not? Mi'amrinan kahuna gedola midchodochi l'hai me'almana. Do we say that it's the fact that he was a kohen gadol that pushes him off and does not allow him to marry an almana? O dilma kuna gedola miftar paterle l'hai me'almana, or maybe the kuna gedola exempted him from an almana. And if you say that v'chinitztaran, when he gets tzaras, the leka kuna gedola, where there no longer is the Kuhuna Gedola, lo pater, he's no longer exempt, so to speak, umutter be'almana, and he's permitted to marry an almana. So Rashi understands that miftar pater would mean he's mutter, he's permitted to an almana. And the Gemara brought a proof from the Brisa, avar machmas muma minayin tamid lomar v'hu. If he has a blemish, he's also included in the halacha of besula. That's from the word v'hu in the pasuk. Te'afilu avar rishon machmas mumo. Even if the first one is no longer serving as kohen gadol because of a blemish, asr ba'almana, he's forbidden to marry an almana. V'chinitztara ein loch mum gadol mizan. Getting tzaras, there's no greater mum than that. That essentially, that is a blemish. V'shaminan minan, we see from this, ta'afilu hachi asr ba'almana, that nevertheless, he's forbidden to a widow. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kohen Gadol Porim Milmata, the Kohen Gadol, he tears his garments from below when he's tearing his garments in mourning, Vahedyot Milmal, and the regular Kohen, he tears his garments from above. Kohen Gadol Makriv Onein Velo Ochel, the Kohen Gadol can bring offerings as an Onein when he's in acute mourning, but he does not eat from those offerings. Vahedyot Lo Makriv Velo Ochel, and the regular Kohen, he doesn't bring the offerings, and he does not eat from the offerings when he is an Onein. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Lamata Mamish, when it says the Kohen Gadol tears from below, it means the very bottom of his garment, that's where he tears. And Lamala, when it says the regular Kohen tears Lamala from above, Lamala Mamish, it means to say that he actually tears the top of his garment. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says Lamata Mekame Safa. When it says Lamata, it doesn't mean the bottom of the garment, it just means below the neckline. And Lamala, when it says above, Lamala Mekame Safa, it means above the neckline, it means the very top over there by the neckline. That's the difference between the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedyot. V'zeh b'tzaver, they're both tearing around the area of the neck. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question on Shmuel from the following brisa. Al kol ha-mesim kulan, for all the dead, meaning whenever you're tearing for the dead, Rotza mavdil kamei safa shalo, if he wants, he completely separates, completely tears that area by the neckline. Rotza eno mavdil kamei safa shalo, and if he wants, he doesn't completely separate it. He doesn't necessarily have to be mavdil, he doesn't have to completely tear it apart. But al aviv yalimo, but for his mother and for his father, if they die, so mavdil, that he does, that complete separation. And so the point of bringing the Bryce over here is to show that you don't need to have Mavdil, you don't need to do a complete separation for it to be considered to be a Kriya. And so the Gemara therefore asks on Shmuel, Kevan de Bialma have a Kara, if in general, even without Mavdil, that's called tearing, so Kari Khan begod of lo Yifram, so shouldn't this be a violation that he shouldn't tear his garments? Meaning to say, if according to Shmuel, the area where he tears is right below the neckline, and that's called a Kara, that is called tearing, and the Pasuk says he's not allowed to tear, how can Shmuel say that that's how the Kohen Gadol should tear his garment? And the Gemara continues and answers, Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda Svirale. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who has a different opinion, Diyamar, because Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol kara sheino mavdil safa shalo, anytime a person tears but it doesn't completely separate the neckline, eino ela kara shal tiflus, that's just a tear that's like a gratuitous tear, it's not really called a kara, and so that's why Shmuel says the way that he should be korea, the way that he should tear, is again, he should tear below the neckline, and that is not going to be considered kriya in terms of the pasuk, so it's not a violation of the God of Lo Yifram according to Shmuel, because Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues and asks, so mi islay le Rabbi Yehuda kriya b'kohen gadol, but does Rabbi Yehuda actually say that a kohen gadol tears? Because again, this entire discussion is assuming that according to Shmuel, the kohen gadol does in fact tear, it's just not called a tear according to the standards of the pasuk. And the Gemara says, Vatanya, but we learned in a Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda says there's no tearing whatsoever by the Kohen Gadol, because it says in the Brisa, Ilu Nemar Rosh Lo Yifro Veged Lo Yifram, had the pasuk said Rosh instead of Rosho, if it said Beged instead of Begadav, so then I would have interpreted the pasuk completely differently. Hayisi Omer, I would have said Baroshu Beged Shel Sota Hakasam Medaber. The pasuk is saying that the Kohen Gadol doesn't undo the hair of the Sota, he doesn't tear the garments of the Sota. That might have been the interpretation of the pasuk. Talmud Omer, the pasuk says as Rosho Lo Yifro Vegadav Lo Yifrom. It says that he doesn't let his hair grow long, he doesn't tear his garments. She'eno befriya ufrima kol ikar. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says it means that he's not part of the idea of priya, of growing out the hair, and prima, he's not part of the tearing of the garments at all. And it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda would say that he doesn't tear his garment at all. And that's not like Shmuel. And the Brisa continues. Rabbi Yishmael says, Eino porim kederech shebnei adam porim, and he doesn't tear the way that others tear. Elahu milmata v'ahedyot milmala, he tears below, and the regular individuals, they tear from above. And so in any case, you see from here that Rabbi Yehuda holds there's no kriya whatsoever when it comes to a Kohen Gadol. And the Gemara answers, Shmuel savar like Rabbi Yehuda b'chada, upal l'galeh b'chada. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda in one regard, but he argues in another regard, meaning Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda that if the person is not mavdil, that's not called a kera in the pasuk, and that's why the Kohen Gadol is allowed to do that kriya right below the neckline. But Shmuel does not fully agree with Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says the Kohen Gadol does not tear at all, but Shmuel says the Kohen Gadol does tear somewhat. And Rashi explains, Eino ela kera shel tiflis, again according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the person is not mavdil, that's just a gratuitous tear. To v'alma lo yotzi yedei kriya, because in regular situations that would not be considered a fulfillment of tearing. Hilkach mutter b'kohen gadol, that's why it's mutter to do it in that fashion by the Kohen Gadol. And Rashi continues, the Brisa said one might have thought Baroshu Veged Shel Sota, that the pasuk is talking about the hair and the garment of the Sota, Tichsivu Pares Rosha Isha, because it says in the pasuk that he undoes her hair, Utanan b'Meseches Sota, and we learned in the Mishnah Meseches Sota, HaKohen Oches Bivgadem, Nikru Vim Niframu, the Kohen grabs her garments, and if they tear, they tear, and the idea over here is that one might have thought that the pasuk is saying the Kohen Gadol is not supposed to do that, and again, the way the pasuk phrased it, since it said Rosho and Bigadav, that's how we know according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the Kohen Gadol is not involved in the Priya or Frima at all. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kol ha'tader mechaveiro, any mitzvah that's more frequent than another mitzvah, kodem es chaveiro, that mitzvah comes first. The more frequent mitzvah takes precedence. V'chol ha'mekudesh mechaveiro, and anyone who's holier than another person, kodem es chaveiro, he takes precedence. Par ha'mashiach u par ha'ed, if you have the bull of the Kohen Gadol and the bull of the community, omdim, if they're both pending, par ha'mashiach kodem, lepar ha'ed b'chol ma'asav. The par ha'mashiach, the par of the Kohen Gadol comes first, before the par of the community for all of its actions. And the Gemara says, Minahani Mili, from where do we know this? Amar Abaya says, the Amar Kruk, because the pasuk says, Milvad olas haboker, asher leolas hatomid, besides the olas haboker, which is for the olas hatomid. And so the Gemara asks, what's the purpose of saying olas hatomid if it already says olas haboker? Michti, let us see, ksiv olas haboker. It's written olas haboker, the morning ola. Olas hatomid lamali, what's the point of saying olas hatomid? And hachi kamer achmana, this is what the pasuk is saying. Call it the tedira kod Kadma, anything that's frequent, like the Olas HaTamid, it comes daily, it's every single day, it's Tadir, so that has precedence. And from there we learn out that Kol HaTadir Mechaveiro, Kodem Es Chaveiro. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'chol ha'mekudesh mechaveiro hu kodem es chaveiro." Anyone that's holier from another person, he goes first. Minolan, from where do we know that? The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. V'kidashto, and sanctify him. That's referring to the Kohen. L'chol davar shebekdusha means for any matters of holiness, he comes first. Liftoach rishon, to open first when it comes to the reading from the Sefer Torah. Ulevarech rishon, and blessing first when it comes to Zimun. V'litol mona yafa rishon, and to take the first most choice portion, he's the one that takes first, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph.